That's actually a good question, because when we see, for example, regarding the topic of mosques in Western Europe, not all of them are recognized or, for example, subsidized by the government, which means that they don't have the same financial means. Some of them, they can go from basic garage storing boxes to big, beautiful buildings made with authorization of their local community. So I think in general, when we should speak whether there is a legal framework or not that this mosque or this church or this synagogue has, I think a place of worship should have a room where there is spiritual service going or can be going on, where there is also a safety for the community itself, that they can find their people who can support them in religious or spiritual service, and that it should be a safe space for women and children. These are the I would say internal criteria. When you speak more about safety regarding architecture, I would say that places of worship should have a kind of architecture that is visible, that it should be a place of worship, that it's also recognizable, and the third, I would say, it should also be well preserved, clean and safe. Let's start with the internal threats, external threats. External threats are, for example, vandalism, cybercrime, robbery. I would also say maybe aggression towards the objects outside. Especially, for example, I remember once that I visited in Antwerp a Jain temple. A Jain is, let's say, kind of a Hinduism-inspired religion, and they had, for example, little statues outside their temple. And these statues sometimes would be destroyed. So this is also an act of aggression towards their temple. So I would say externally, these are the factors we see. Internally, it can be even sometimes people from the community itself that are not happy with the director of the religious place of worship, or with the priest or the imam. So we can see both types, but of course the external threats are much more bigger, because this is something you cannot control. The internal threats, it's something you can control easily. If you see that there is a person misbehaving, you can directly intervene, while with external threats not. I would also say different from type to type. We see, for example, that mosques and synagogues are much more vulnerable for external threats, because it's unfortunately people in the political time that we are living in, they see this as a kind of foreign community, even if Muslims and Jews are already living hundreds of years in Belgium. And this is different with a church. A church, they see it as a part of their own identity. So when we look, for example, to churches, most problems that churches have is that some churches are not even active anymore, and that's why they are getting vandalized, or people sometimes they try to sneak in and do a little robbery of the small objects that are still there. But there is no such thing as really an act of terrorism, an act of shooting, an act of violence against churches as we see with mosques or synagogues. So the biggest threats, it depends from place of worship to place of worship, but I would say the biggest threats are these days with Muslims and Jews. The most types are vandalism, the most types regarding, let's say in general vandalism, I would say, types of aggression, literally aggression, because the vandalism, aggression, these are, like we say, one-hit attacks. It means somebody does it, but it doesn't happen on a frequently base. Contrary to, for example, attacks that are happening with a kind of regularly time frame and intention behind, this doesn't happen so much in Europe. It are more one-hit attacks like aggression, vandalism. I would say intimidation is also something that is happening, because people, they should know that intimidation is actually also a threat. It's not because they don't hit the building, it's not because they don't hit a worshipper from the community that they cannot treat them. They actually try to intimidate them. And this can actually happen in several ways. Especially on social media, this is also a big part, where people are writing all kind of bullshit without even thinking what they are actually writing. So intimidation, vandalism and aggression, I would say. I don't think it's actually a choice that communities or places of worship has to make. Both of them are on the same line for me. it's actually internal security and external security. External security is security by design. I think a lot of places of worship can protect themselves much more better with the right architecture, with the right use of digital protection as cameras, as advanced doorbells, advanced doors in general, fences, protection of the windows, alarm systems. But inside, internally, I think place of worship also plays a big part in the protection, how to make it safe for fire security, how to make it safe in case a terrorist attack happens. I never, till now, I only met one community that is prepared if terrorist attacks happen, and that's the Jewish community. Every year they have, in collaboration with a local police officer, a simulation, let's say, an exercise when a terrorist attacks happen, how the community should react. This is also something I think that internally the place of worship should be much more trained on this kind of realities. And this is something that we see in Belgium which is not happening at all, unfortunately. I think the government should be much more behind, or maybe organizations like Proton should make awareness about it, because a lot of communities, they are not thinking so much about it. Well, actually it's a threat, it can be a reality. When there is a fire that will break out, a terrorist attack that will happen, so many things can happen. So yeah, both of them are on the same line for me. I think the community should be much more better organized. First of all, one of the problems I see with the religious communities is that they're not organized at all. Mostly there is the priest, imam or rabbi, and then you have like a director of the place of worship itself, of the building. But beside that, they don't have a structure. As for example, I always say a place of worship should be like a football team. In a football team, you have a president, you have a technical director, sportive director, you have a commercial director. So actually, they divide the tasks for every kind of specific topic that is going on. I think in a mosque it should be the same. You should have a director of the building, you should have a security officer who is only specialized in the security of the building and the community. You should have like a commercial person, a treasurer, a secretary. You should have like somebody who is responsible for the women, somebody who is responsible for the youth, because as a director you can impossibly do all these kind of things together. So you should divide the tasks carefully with people of knowledge, with people of good intention. Then the imam or the priest or the rabbi or whoever it is can focus on the spiritual part. They don't have to mix with the safety, etc. But I think every place of worship should be organized in such organigram that is very clear for the community itself where they have to go to when they have questions, and also who is in charge of what kind of topics. I think organization of the community is very important, and also much more collaboration with stakeholders. Something I never understood with religious communities in Belgium at least, but also in other parts of Europe. If you ask them who is your local police commissioner, most of them they don't even know. Who is your local firefighter commissioner? They don't even know. So I think a place of worship should interact like any institution in a country. They should have good relations with stakeholders, that from the moment they know we have a problem with an act of aggression, we can call this number from the police, they will directly come. Or when there is a victim from an act of aggression, they know who is responsible at the hospital service to send an ambulance, that they can come. Actually, to be honest, the only community that is good organized again is the Jewish community. I noticed that they are very well organized when it comes to security. They have internally their own structure, they have also their own hospitals, they have their own schools, they are very well organized. I have a lot of respect for the Jewish community, how they organize their community, and I think all other religious communities in Europe, if they want to survive on long term and make it a fruitful place of worship, they should actually have the same organigram. I think first of all the public authorities should create much more awareness about everything that we are discussing now. Of aggression, place of worship, organigram. They should also try to support these places of worship, to facilitate it, and actually not maybe by putting pressure on the religious place of worship, but also putting kind of pressure on the, pressure is a bad word actually, because it's not really pressure, but let's say give more support to, for example, the public institutions like the police, etc., to have a obligated collaboration with places of worship. this should not be even a choice in my head. It should be something that they should do directly from themselves. If you see, for example, the police, they work with schools together because they understand the safety of children is one of the biggest priority for every policeman. But the same can be for the place of worship. The place of worship also has schools for children in the weekend or pedagogic programs for children. So I think this should be even a kind of obligation to collaborate with place of worship. I also think that public authorities should be much more hardly against perpetrators who commits acts of violence or aggression against places of worship. In most of the times, what we noticed when we did research in whole Europe actually, when there was an act of aggression or an act of intimidation and the police was caught, they mostly even didn't sue it afterwards. They just made a complaint, but it was not even looked afterwards by the prosecutor. So I think there should be a zero tolerance against aggression of places of worship. And last but not least, I should also try, if I was a public authority, to let the local people of the local community where the place of worship is located have more interaction by organizing interreligious dialogues, by organizing interfaith programs, that actually people get to know each other. Because in our society we have so much diversity, but we live next to each other, not with each other. Interfaith dialogue is very important, and it's even in my eyes critical. I'm convinced that every local community in Belgium should organize at least once a year an interfaith dialogue, because we saw the benefits of it in my own city. After we have worked several times interfaithly with other religious communities, for example, the schools, they visit our mosque on a yearly basis, because they understood that it's very important to also get knowledge of different kind of faiths than your own faith. We see, for example, that we are getting invited by different religious communities on their specific holidays as an act of peace, a symbolic act of peace. We see that because of this also the relation with the neighbors get better, because they see that it's not only a service to our own community, we also try to benefit for the whole city. Interfaith dialogues are very important, on condition that you do the interfaith dialogue not to convert the other person, but more to give a kind of perception of your own religion. Because the moment you make a kind of, let's say, debate from the interfaith dialogue, it's get very bad. Then people have the impression, look, religious people, they're only fighting, they don't do anything else except making problems between themselves. They cannot even agree, imagine them with other faiths. So I think interfaith dialogues, when you do it in such a way that you inform people, I would almost say like an academic debate, and you make it happen for everybody. You do it on an inclusive way, not only for studied people, not only for older people, but for children, women, youth. I think that the benefits are so huge. Yes, of course, the use of technology is very debated these days, because there are also several other juridical points that we have to take into consideration. For example, the right on privacy. These are things that are sometimes conflicting with the technology that we use these days. But I think whether the place of worship is big or small, there are several things that all of them they need. For example, camera systems. I think this is very important these days, that at least even if there is nobody in the place of worship, you still, by your phone, for example, you can check through a camera what is going on. That you always have eyes and ears on your place of worship. I would also say advanced doors, very important. There are so many doors made by technology in such a way that you can even control a door from a distance. There is also something which I really like, and that's actually the fact that you can work with sensors, for example. Alarm systems, also very important. So I think these are systems made by technology that every place of worship should use. Well, actually, it's a very important question and a very good question. As several questions before, you asked about why public authorities should intervene with places of worship. And I think this is one of the key roles also why it is very important, because a place of worship, even if it is, let's say, locally bound only to its local community, still it is affected by geopolitical tensions. You cannot deny this. Regarding, for example, what we currently see Palestine, Israel, what is going on. We see that this affects every Muslim and Jewish community in Europe. Or for example, in the UK, what happened between India and Pakistan. This affected every Hindu temple and Pakistani mosque, let's say, in the UK. So geopolitical tensions always have consequences for what is happening worldwide. Because actually in Europe especially, I'm not speaking so much outside Europe, but especially in Europe, most places of worship, when it comes to mosques, even churches these days, are actually ethnical temples. If you look, for example, around in Brussels, you have Turkish mosque, Moroccan mosque, Pakistani mosque, Afghani mosque. This is a totally different reality than, for example, when you go to, I would say, Albania, where even Albania is a European country, where Albania, there everybody speaks Albanian during the Friday prayer. It's all under one authority. There is no such thing as a Pakistani mosque in Albania because it's all controlled by the government and they already have a system since hundreds of years. Here in Europe, the organization of mosques in Belgium, for example, specifically, is only something that exists since 60 years. So we have ethnical places of worship which now are interacting much more with each other, so the community gets much more diverse, which is a very good thing. But at the same time, this also means that the geopolitical tensions have also much more consequences for European places of worship than in any other part of the world, which we also see in America, in Canada, etc. So I think if the government is smart and they want to safeguard the safety of their people, they should always take this in consideration, that when there are, for example, football games, wars abroad, political elections abroad, that this always can have consequences on places of worship. And this is a true fact, you know. Even a sport game can have consequences on a place of worship. Even the war in Ukraine, let's say, the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, because of this, a lot of consequences also in Belgium are happening. So yes, geopolitical tensions, especially in Europe, they have a lot of consequences.